Hey guys, it's Avery.
And Skylar.
And this is our Unit 2 review for AP World History.
Yes, it is.
So we're starting off strong with talking about so in our last unit, I'm just going to go back a little bit. In our last unit, we were talking about all the different and new empires that were large and just how...
Thriving.
Thriving in this era. We're still in the same era as this last
Which is 1200 to 1450, as we should probably clarify.
Yes.
I want to add on there, in the last unit, we do see the rise of new empires. Here, we're going to see more of the thriving of those empires through...
And how they're connected.
Right,
yeah.
Through the trade networks, our three networks of exchange.
Yeah.
Our three main ones being the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean trade, and the Trans-Saharan.
Yes, so let's start off with the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads were trade routes that ran from China to Europe, and it was named after the popular silk product from China.
Right. I want to mention how what was being sold on the Silk Road was essentially luxury goods, like silk.
Yes.
I think, stuff like that.
Porcelain. Yeah.
So the Silk Road does obviously make many countries and empires rich, or not countries, empires rich. Yeah. And they promote the growth of new powerful trading cities. For example, Kashgar. I'm pretty sure that was in Africa. Mm-hmm. And essentially what these cities were is there was a lot of places where merchants would stop while on the Silk Road, meet other people. And this is also where we see the exchange of a lot of culture stuff, religion, texts,
This
goods.
is an example of the caravanserai, too. The caravanserai on the Silk Roads.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So, with that being said, so I'm trying to think. Yeah, we see, forms of credit. We're obviously seeing the development of money economies.
Or the Chinese developed what we call...
Paper money,
but they called it flying money in that time period because it could just fly away. But that was the first instance of paper money, and we use Apple Pay now. But usually.
So the Silk Road is essentially promoting innovation such as paper money or flying money. We see banking houses, which was what I was saying. These houses where merchants could stop on the way of the Silk Road
and exchange their flying money. Yeah.
Right. We see bills of exchanges and a lot of just credit. So money is becoming pretty predominant during this time period as there's a lot of trading and stuff here.
And these routes were so important because there was such a high demand for luxury goods in Afro-Eurasia, China, and Persia. So they all, Chinese, Persian, and Indian artisans all wanted to get more money from Afro-Eurasia, so they expanded their production of textiles and porcelains for export, and the manufacture of iron and steel also expanded.
Right, so this is also where we go back to commercialization, which we kind of talked about a little bit in the last unit.
Yeah.
Because we essentially see it in China, but here now we're kind of seeing it everywhere, where empires are just exporting more than demand, essentially making more products than is requested, so they just make a lot of money. Yeah. So we see that with textiles and porcelains in China.
Yeah.
And I think with that, we can get into one of my favorite situations in history. What do you think? The Mongol Empire?
Yes, the
Mongols are freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So you want to start?
Sure, I'd love to. So basically, a lot of empires collapsed in different regions of the world, and in some areas were replaced by new imperial states, namely the Mongol Khanates. And do you want to take a little minute of appreciation for our homie and the guy that we bonded over?
Genghis
or Genghis Khan?
We just love him. So
Oh, no, we don't. No, we
yes, we do. So, Genghis, I'm not sure this is much of a must know, but I know how the formation of the Mongols is. Genghis Khan's stories, not so much. He basically rose from nomadic tribes. He was just very charismatic, and he was just, people
like many
liked him.
other leaders in history.
Right, so he just rose to power quickly. People loved him, such like that. One thing we have to mention is how did the Mongols even, come to be? Essentially, in modern-day Mongolia, which is where they did come from, it was basically the unification of all these Mongol nomadic tribes and peoples.
Yeah.
And we see this under Genghis Khan. When Genghis Khan manages to unite these nomadic people, we see the rise of the Mongols becoming one of the most I would probably say the most strongest empire of all time. The
Yeah.
only thing is it didn't last for that long.
True.
Do you want to continue?
Yes.
And we'll also name, they had 3 major khanates. Which, do you want to talk about? She's fixing her girl.
Yeah, it's sorry.
Do you want to go run up and grab a charger? I can keep talking.
I mean, yeah, I don't know what's happening. Whatever, you just keep talking.
You good? Okay, so we see these empires. We have the Golden Horde in Russia, which is the Mongol control in Russia. I'm blinking. What are the Mongol Mongol khanates called? I know this. So we have the Golden Horde in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
The Yuan dynasty in China, which is obviously ruled by Khan.
Genghis Khan.
No, it's not Genghis.
Oh.
Wait, it's just like his brother.
Oh, his
Yuan.
nephew.
Yeah.
What's his name? Kublai
Khan.
Yeah.
Right. So we have that. We see the. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So here, let's just take a minute. Like, how
Right.
did the Mongols impact the existing trade routes?
Oh, this is super important. Yeah. You wanna? Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So basically, the Mongol Empire's expansion opened up trade routes because they were really focused on. They weren't necessarily doing a lot of they didn't have their own items or products, but they did. What they did was they facilitated trade and they promoted trade. So
Yeah. One way they did this was through Pax Mongolica, which essentially it means Mongol peace, where they protected merchants from thieves and bandits, and as trade was protected, all these other economies are going to begin to flourish, but the main people who are getting the richest are essentially the Mongols. And we see this later too. Any empires that are the center of trade will make a lot of money.
yeah.
I also want to note that the Mongol Empire, at least at the beginning, they are religiously tolerant. And this is actually one of the first times we see this in this time period, which is obviously very interesting. It says a lot about the Mongols. They just were never really into it. Later they did convert to Islam, but as in the beginning, it's not like that. So anything else you want to add about the Mongols and how awesome they were?
I don't know. I just think that their interregional contacts and their conflicts between states and empires encouraged significant technological and cultural transfers, and that impacted a lot of other
economies. And I figured out the last one. It was the Ilkhanate in Persia. So we have the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde, Russia, and the Ilkhanate in Persia.
Yeah.
And those are the 3 main ones going on. And then eventually we see the collapse. After Genghis dies, it's really hard for the Mongol people to keep together. And so on. So I think the next thing we get into is Indian Ocean trade, because this is another one. So we kind of went over the Silk Road, especially a lot last year, but with the Mongols making it thrive even more.
Yeah.
The next big major network at this time is the Indian Ocean network. So Avery, if you want to start us there.
So basically, the Indian Ocean trade was facilitated through improved transportation technologies and commercial practices, which pretty much just increased the volume of trade and expanded the geographical range of these routes. And it also just promoted the growth of powerful new trading cities along this route. So the Indian Ocean trade was obviously along the Indian Ocean.
Right. So here, I'll go for you a little bit here. So the funny thing about the Indian Ocean trade is it became a thing because the silk trade was expensive, right? It was luxury goods.
And it was hard to traverse all those different...
Right. And things were expensive. The Indian Ocean trade, not so much.
Yeah, because of the new developments in ship technologies and things like the astrolabe, the compass, and an example, let's just say the Chinese junks, that all of those made it easier and less difficult to travel. And obviously a ship is going to hold more than a camel will.
Right.
So there was a lot more normal items instead of luxury goods transferred and traded across these Indian Ocean routes.
Right. Yeah, so back to the innovations. This is really big. We see the development of the electric compass, or the metal compass, in China, which obviously goes everywhere. You know, that points which direction you're going.
Yeah.
The astrolabe, which measures longitude and latitude, which is really helpful to ships.
Yeah.
And larger ship designs. And I'm pretty sure at this time we also see the monsoon winds, which is really important.
They harnessed that. They figured it out.
They discovered how to use the winds to basically go where they want to go.
Yeah.
Super helpful. These are all really important innovations that led to,
Yeah, and the main groups that were being connected through these routes were the Eurasian societies to the East African coast.
Right. So we also see, the growth of states at this time. So essentially, coastal cities are going to get richer, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like those trading cities along the Silk Road, but now they're stopping along the coast.
Yeah.
For example, we see the Swahili city-states and the Sultanate of Malacca. These states just thrive because, they can export a lot through this.
For example, the Swahili civilization was a group of commercial city-states along the East African coast. Also, Srivijaya was an empire that was very involved in the Indian Ocean trade, and it was located in modern-day Malaysia. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, moving on here a little bit, we're still on the Indian Ocean, but so in key places along the important trade routes, merchants are going to begin to setting up, diasporic communities, where essentially... diaspora communities where they introduce their own cultural traditions into the indigenous cultures, and in turn indigenous cultures influence emerging cultures. So essentially at this time we're seeing a lot of blending of culture. We have religion. We know at this time Islam is very predominant around the world. Obviously Christianity and Judaism are thriving as well, just not as much, essentially because Muslim merchants were big and they were spreading Islam. In Africa, we're gonna see a lot of blending. This kind of goes back to last unit and at the beginning of this one. We're going to see blending of native indigenous beliefs with Islam, and that's going to be big.
Yeah.
Obviously Ethiopia stays Christian.
Yeah.
So anything you want to add to that one? We have a couple more.
What about interregional contacts?
Right.
Yeah.
So conflicts between states and empires encourage significant technological and cultural transfers, including during... so this is one of those things. We have Ming Admiral Zheng He.
Who was a Muslim eunuch who... Oh.
No, he wasn't. He was Chinese.
I know, but he was a Chinese Muslim eunuch who captained the voyages throughout the Indian Ocean.
Oh. Yeah,
to bring other civilizations into the Chinese tribute system.
Right, so if we want to talk about major people during this time, Zheng He will be one of those people, because he is, not sponsoring, but he is going on these huge voyages along the Indian Ocean trade and obviously using the innovations that we talked about and so on. So so we already talked about the monsoon winds and all that. And I think here we can get into our third and final trade network, Trans-Saharan trade.
Or they're also known as the sand roads. If you want to remember it better, we can say Silk roads, sea roads, and sand roads.
It makes it easier. Yeah.
The Trans-Saharan trade routes pretty much just connected North Africa and the Mediterranean to interior West Africa.
Right. So here, we're going to see the growth of inter-regional trade, and once again, just like the Silk Road, just like the Indian Ocean Road, we're gonna see how innovations are gonna build up this trade. For example, we have the camel saddle and caravans. If you want to talk about that.
Yes, the Arabian camel and the introduction of the camel saddle was really, really important to this sand road trading system, because the camels were able to carry a lot and a lot of weight, and they wouldn't have to drink for days. They were very low maintenance, and they could just do all
carry a lot.
Yeah.
They were very so then also we're gonna see improved transportation technologies and commercial practices lead to an increased volume of trade and expanded the geographical range of existing trade routes, including this Trans-Saharan trade network. So that's kind of just talking about how the technology and innovations are going to make the Trans-Saharan Trade Network thrive.
Yeah.
Also to note that the Trans-Saharan is from Africa. I always try to think of the Trans-Saharan predominantly Africa.
Yeah.
You have the Silk Road, which is Afro-Eurasia, and then the Indian Ocean Road, which would be the Indian Ocean.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the West African civilizations that developed after trade grew in Africa due to the sand roads, and namely, let's focus on Ghana and Mali. So we've already talked a little bit about Mali and how Mansa Musa became extremely wealthy because of trans-Saharan trade, and that specific kingdom was in West Africa.
Right.
And then also we have Ghana, which is also in West Africa, but it also experienced similar prosperity due to this trans-Saharan trade.
Right, yeah. So Mali is actually going to make a lot of money. A lot of the things in Africa, a lot of what's being traded along the Trans-Saharan is gold and salt, which is going to make these African states really rich at this time.
Yeah.
And I think that we can talk about like the cultural consequences. And remember, consequences can be negative and positive.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about like the cultural consequences of this connectivity.
Yeah. So basically, there was a lot, obviously, of cross-cultural interactions throughout all of these different routes. So many different cultures were blending, and merchants spread their ideas. So this resulted in widespread diffusion of literary, artistic, and cultural traditions, as well as scientific and technological innovations. So let's go through a few examples of this just to give a few. There's a ton, but these are just a few.
So we're obviously going to see religion spread, for example, like Buddhism, and we already saw how Buddhism was kind of making way in China, and we're going to see that in Southeast Asia. We're also going to see like the spread of Islam into Africa, which was what I was saying. That's a big one because it was among the trans-Saharan trade.
Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah. So some technology. Obviously, we have the Chinese junk ships that are being like diffused. There's also gunpowder from China and flying money from China.
Right. Paper money.
And we also have what's another.
I would say those are the main ones. Obviously, there's a lot of innovations, and we already talked about them. You know, we have like the compass and everything that is going to lead to more trade. So that's a big note for this unit is the innovations.
Yeah.
I think also one thing to mention is like the number of travelers during this period. Not necessarily super a must know, but we have Ibn Battuta.
Ibn Battuta.
And Marco Polo, and we have to say that Ibn was one of the most like known for his traveling. We're probably going to get an excerpt from him.
Yeah, there was a lot of people who were traveling across these routes, but what made Ibn special was that he actually wrote his travels down, and his written notes on all of these different cultures and people that he interacted with have really, really, really been influential throughout centuries.
And then finally, we could talk about the environmental consequences of this connectivity. So obviously, we're continuing with, crops such as like bananas from Africa and champa rice in East Asia.
Yeah.
But then we're also going to see epidemic diseases like the bubonic plague spread a lot. So
so let's just dive into each of them a little bit, just for example. So let's talk about champa rice. Like, where did champa rice come from originally? I know it's commonly associated with China, but where did it come from?
So champa rice did come from China, like you said. It was essentially, the thing is with champa rice is that it could be grown multiple times a year, which is super amazing because that means they could produce more of it, which obviously led to population growth.
But it was given to, it was introduced into China by Koreans. As part of their tributary system. Right,
I actually forgot about that. Right, so we know about the tribute system, which we will get into, I think, next unit. And the bubonic plague is spreading, which is obviously bad. And we're going to see, actually, the Mongols, well, I guess this would have been this unit, the Mongols purposely spreading the bubonic plague so they could win. One thing we didn't really mention about the Mongols is they were really good on horseback. So that's why when we see the rise of gunpowder...
Very, very, very...
Very talented. So when we see the rise of gunpowder, we kind of see the fall of the Mongols because they can't load up a gun and ride horses at the same time. We do see them catapult dead bodies who are sick with the plague into empires, which lead to falls.
Mainly, the spread of the bubonic plague was through rats and fleas, and this is important to note because the rats could find little crevices in the junk ships, and
Right.
they could be transported across the Indian Ocean routes, and then fleas will attach themselves to camels or to other animals and just be transported across the Silk Roads and the Trans-Saharan routes. So all of these different factors put into the massive devastation that these epidemics had on different populations.
Right, so I think with that, we are wrapped up with Unit 2, and we will start Unit 3 shortly. So thanks, guys, for listening. Subscribe.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
bye.